Hi guys, you ready for chapter 4? Here we go. Can I go down and watch on the stoop? Klaus asked. Heinrich looked across the road. The Kolbs were out, and no one seemed to be bothering them. Fry's, too. And Landis's. The soldiers seemed friendly enough. Strange thing to say about soldiers. I'll go with him, Heinrich offered. Dottie nodded. Stay back from the road. Hurry, Klaus said, as he dashed down the stairs 2 at a time. They're marching faster. Heinrich chuckled, but he hurried. The Groff boys sat opposite one another on the 2 benches built between the posts on opposing sides of the stoop. It was like their own little meeting house, but without a preacher's table in the middle. At least that's how it had seemed to Heinrich when he was younger. On and on they came, mounted officers, their swords flashing in the autumn sun. Teams of horses pulling heavy cannon, infantrymen marching behind, some in red coats, some in blue, others strange and fierce in plaid stockings and petticoats where their breeches ought to have been. And everywhere, muskets, swords, bayonets. Heinrich shuddered. So many ways to hurt and kill. For 2 hours, Heinrich and Klaus watched as one of England's most powerful armies marched by. Must be headed to the city, Heinrich said in low tones. Poor Philadelphia, they have no idea what's headed their way. Klaus looked worried. How long till they get there, do you think? The front line must have reached the Northern Liberties by now. Can't be more than another hour, I reckon. As they spoke, a soldier on the edge of the column noticed them. Heinrich stood protectively as the man saluted Klaus. How are you, young one? The soldier asked in confident English tones, never breaking a stride. Klaus hesitated and looked at his brother. Heinrich nodded. Klaus answered, Very fine, thank you. The soldier nodded in return. Then he was gone, lost in the endless stream of marching, tramping, parading power. As the parade thinned to a trailing drizzle of camp women, surgeons, and supply wagons, Heinrich realized with a start that some of the soldiers were knocking on neighboring doors and heading down the lanes between the houses. Dottie stepped out onto the stoop. You boys better get inside. They're not marching on to Philadelphia? Heinrich whispered, hoping Klaus didn't hear. It appears not. Go inside. Heinrich stood just inside the door and watched as an officer in a well-appointed uniform and powdered wig bowed before his father. Good afternoon, sir, the officer said in English. I am Captain Edwin Crawley of the 42nd Regiment. Dottie bowed in return and spoke in the same language. A good day to you. My name is Abram Groff. How might I serve you? I have 16 men in need of fresh water, a place to erect their shelters, and such food and other supplies as you feel inclined to provide. I have a wife and 2 young sons. I would not wish for them to be molested. These are honorable men, I assure you. I have stock and gardens. I would not like to see them bothered either. That is perfectly understandable, Captain Crawley said. There are no women in the group? None. Then we can offer you our hospitality. Your men may set up their tents beside the spring house, and you may help yourself to as much water as you and your animals need. Let me show you the field. It was needless conversation. Everyone knew how the soldiers read the quartering act. Take what you need and vandalize the rest. But Heinrich found it gentlemanly all the same. He hurried down the center hallway to the back of the house and arrived before his father and Captain Crawley emerged from the lane. The upper half of the split door to the yard was open, so Heinrich had no trouble picking up the conversation. As many apples as they can eat, Dottie was saying. Though I'd not like to see them passed about. There are next year's cider, you understand. He gestured to the cow shed and the chicken coop. I don't mind if they share the milk either, as long as they save us some. Same with the eggs. That is more than generous, Mr. Groff. And if you have trouble with any of the men, don't hesitate to report it to me. You will find me in the Kelter house. With that, the captain bowed again and left to gather his men. Come quickly, boys. We must bring in the flax before it gets trampled, called Dottie. It could use a few more nights of dew, Heinrich said. We'll just have to scotch it longer. Grab the wheelbarrows, Pack them full and dump the flax in the hall between the parlor and the weaving room. We can carry it upstairs later and spread it in the bedchambers. Klaus's eyebrows went up. We're going to dry it in the house? No telling, but that weary soldiers might think fibers like these would make a fine mattress, Dottie said. Or kindling, Heinrich added. The soldiers entered the yard shortly after the boys dumped the first load of flax in the hallway. The two groups exchanged a few awkward hellos, but mostly they stared at one another as they went about their separate business. Heinrich glanced at the camp rapidly springing up in his garden. Several of the soldiers had leaned twigs against the hedge and were covering them with straw and leaves to fashion a series of crude wigwams. Seems his father had been right about the flax. A young blond fellow caught Heinrich's attention. He had hung his coat on a fence post and was grunting over a pry bar. He was taking apart the fence. Hey, yelled Heinrich, what are you doing with the fence? The soldier turned toward him in surprise. I need some planks. There's plenty of branches to be had from the trees in the woods. Get them from there. The soldier returned to his dismantling job as if Heinrich hadn't said a word. Heinrich ran to fetch his father. Let them be, Dottie said. Trouble's too easy to come by. But the cow, Heinrich said. At this rate, their milk would wander off into the hungry camp of some neighboring band of soldiers. We'll picket her. We can repair the fence when they're gone. Here, take this bucket to the men as are setting closest to the spring. You're giving them a bucket too? If we give them one, they won't have to steal it. Heinrich shook his head as he carried the leather bucket to the yard. Sometimes his father made no sense. He rounded the spring house and found, to his disgust, that his fence-finagling tenant was now using Mom's clothesline to fasten his posts to the back of the shed. The soldier ignored him. I brought you a bucket, Heinrich said. The soldier looked up. What for? So you can fetch water. Apparently, the soldier didn't know what to say to this. He stopped his work and stared at Heinrich. Was that a look of shame that crossed his face? He took the bucket. I'm Nat Shaw. Heinrich Groff. Well, thanks, Nat said, for the bucket. My father sent it, Heinrich said, and quickly returned to the house. Sheets of rain cascaded off the roof and crashed onto the road below. Heinrich tossed in his bed and wondered how the soldiers were making out in the yard. Nat Shaw's blonde hair must be fairly floating by now. He's probably shivering, too, in spite of his stolen shelter. Well, that's what happens when you sleep out under someone else's hedge. He rolled again. No matter how he fluffed it, the straw matted in the mattress below him or poked through the ticking to stab him in the side. This was ridiculous. He tossed aside his coverlet and stepped over to the window. He had opened the shutters hours ago when the rain had first started. The glow of the rising half-moon was hardly perceptible through the storm. Wet, cold, and dark besides. Yes, Nat and his fellows were most certainly miserable. Heinrich finally fell asleep, only to be wakened a few hours later by his mother shaking his shoulder. Wake up, Heinrich. We may have only a few hours. He sat up. For what? The army has gone to Philadelphia. Your father says they'll be back. Come, we must hurry. That's the end of chapter 4. Next week, chapter 5 of A Drop of Mercy. Hope you guys have a good week. Gonna see some of you pretty soon for testing. But yeah, the rest of us will see each other pretty soon.